everybody here in Penticton, I'm sure, has heard of Chautauqua. And, you know, it's kind of an interesting word, and everybody thinks that it's, you know, it's really kind of mysterious. And it's actually an Iroquois word that refers to a lake in New York State. And in the late 1870s, two fellows, one was a Methodist bishop and the other was an inventor. They started a summer camp that would be there to educate Sunday school teachers, to make them appear more, you know, help them be more professional. So it really wasn't focusing on religion, even though it was a camp that was put together by the Methodist Church, so that, you know, it's kind of evolved since then. And actually, it continues to go today. These are just some photos from different times through the years. The color photo there actually shows what's called the Miller Bell Tower. And so that's kind of an interesting part of the Chautauqua Institute. Another thing that is I find really fascinating about the Chautauqua Institute, and I realized after I got here that I didn't bring it with me, is that they have the oldest book club going. And every year they print a list of books that should be read. And so this book club has been going since 1878, and for 2016, 2017, they've also published a list of books. The idea was that as a correspondence course, that it would allow people to become more informed and, you know, provide some education for people who could not get education. The Hall of Philosophy was built in 1874, but it also is still in use today. On Chautauqua property, it's a massive historical selection of buildings. Almost every denomination has a church there, because even though it is not a church organization, it certainly has a feeling of community, and so that's part of what is there. As well as focusing on education, they focused on the idea of music and the arts as a part of that education. And so that they actually have a symphony orchestra. So all of these different things, as you think about how these things came along in the 20s, the symphony became a permanent part of it. You can kind of relate that to what happened in Penticton and the Okanagan Valley once Eva Cleland got here. So this is a map of what the Chautauqua Institute looks like today. So they have, you know, massive amount of buildings and schools and meeting centers and housing. And every single summer for, you know, a few weeks in time, they are absolutely inundated with thousands of people who are there because they want to learn. At the same time that the Chautauqua Institute was getting started, in Grimsby Park, Ontario, there was a very similar type of a camp. And it was put together by the Canadian Methodists. And in looking at the census records for 1916, in Eva's family, her mother and her sisters and Eva were all listed as Methodists. And so there's probability that her mother may have known of Grimsby Park prior to the Chautauqua actually coming to their home in Saskatchewan. But the Chautauqua, you know, it was all about the big brown tent. And the big brown tent brought speakers and actors and singers and bands. It was just a real opportunity for small towns to get the kind of culture that they would otherwise would not have access to. And they really became an important part of the culture of small towns in the US and then later into Canada. So in 1920, there were 21 companies operating on 93 circuits throughout the US and Canada. And the Ericksons actually brought the idea from the US to Canada in that White Ellison, the company that was, managing all of the Chautauquas, kind of looked at Canada as not being profitable. I mean, they had massive amount of stops on the circuits in the States, but with Canada's population being sparser, they really felt that it wasn't productive in a monetary sense, so the Ericssons said that they would take it over. The one thing that John Erickson said was he would only take it over if he got to take Nola with him. They weren't married at the time, but he recognized in her that she was absolutely fantastic at organizing and, putting together everything that had to be done for a Chautauqua. And he was actually a lawyer, and he had gone to law school and had joined the Chautauqua as a summer job just to raise some funds, and he loved it so much he ended up becoming a really key person in the Chautauqua movement. The key part of the Chautauqua, of course, was the guarantors, and so each community had to put together a committee, and the committee had to guarantee the ticket sales for the event in order to have the Chautauqua come to town. And they had a choice, depending on how successful they were at selling tickets, of having either a 3 or 4 day Chautauqua or a 6-day event. And in the Pentagon Herald, starting in 1918, there's been an awful lot of stuff written about the Chautauqua. There's a lot of different articles, and in this particular article they're talking about Mother Goose, because they did have entertainment for children as well. And as I got looking through stuff, because I just kind of got really swept away with looking up information and researching the Chautauqua, and between the Glenbow archives and the Iowa University archives, they have an awful lot of pictures and information relating to Chautauquas. And this particular picture here was actually a part of a promotional package, and this photo was actually used in the local newspaper. Some of the people that came were very interesting people, people that you would not normally see in Penticton, and one of those was G. Whitfield Ray, and he was known as the official explorer of Bolivia, and he had spent 15 years in Bolivia researching the tribes, the local tribes, and lived a very interesting life, and went on to the circuit. And so he shared his story with everyone. He did write a book because he had a really interesting time where he was on horseback and riding into the Bolivian jungle and what have you, and then there's kind of all of the different things that happened along with it, including losing some toes. And another thing that's in the newspaper a lot, and they would start with the advertisements, and there would always be maybe 2 or 3 in a month. Because the guarantors in the city had promised that all of the tickets would be sold in order to provide for the event, there was a lot of advertising that went into the Chautauqua. And they would kind of give an idea of who was coming to town. They'd have, set the lineup, because every year they would change up who was coming and have a mixture of singing. There'd be some drama and lectures. It was educational and cultural. And you can see in this particular one, in the 6th day, that because they had the DeMille Quartet, but they also had Emmeline Pankhurst, and she was really a well-known suffragette. And she came and spoke in Penticton, which was really kind of interesting, given the time, because part of one of the things that was kind of an offshoot of the Chautauqua was the fact that because all of the superintendents, or the young Chautauqua girls that came to town and looked after things, it gave them a career. it provided a career. And so with her speaking as well, it really provided an incentive for women. And a couple of her quotes that I really enjoyed were, trusting God, she will provide. And she also used to say, I'm what you call a hooligan. So, you know, she had a sense of humor, but she really spent a lot of time on the circuit talking about women and the vote. And she, at one point in time in England, she actually had run for office, changed her mind, did not go through with it. And by the time that the women were given the vote, she passed away within a month or two. So she spent her entire life, and she had both of her daughters involved in it as well. It became a real family affair. And as I say, there were all kinds of positive things in the newspaper about Chautauqua. It was, at the time of Chautauqua, it was also a time of vaudeville. And so they were kind of always, you know, playing against each other. And a lot of people, when they hear about Chautauqua, they'll automatically think, oh yeah, well that, you know, the big brown tent, it's, you know, kind of like vaudeville. But they made a point of being a step above what would be considered vaudeville. And this is a banner that was on the newspaper, the Big Six Chautauqua Week. And that, I thought that was really neat because it actually gave the location of where the tent was going to be. Because the big tent was going to be at the corner of Fairview and Martin Street. So I was talking to Jean in the archives, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, so where could that be then? Because I'm thinking of Fairview and Martin. But it really was on a different street, totally, because at that point in time, what is now Wade Avenue was Fairview Avenue. So it actually, instead of being up here very close to the library, it was much closer to Orchard Avenue where the tent was. These were all just lots that are shown there, but that is, at that point in time, that's where the tent was set up. And this one here, regarding ticket sales, you can see by the list of names all of the people who were a part of the committee. And so you can see all the different familiar names. At this point in time, this was in 1921, of the businesses and the people who were supporting Chautauqua and what Chautauqua could do for the city of Penticton. And one of those names that was on that list was W.R. King. So it's no surprise that W.R. King and Company would place full-page ads during Chautauqua Week. Everybody would get dressed up in their best clothing. It was not something that was very casual. It was a real event when the Chautauqua came to town. And so for the merchants, it was also a chance to make sales. Because at this point in time, there weren't an awful lot of different communities that had the Chautauqua, so it actually brought people in from the neighboring communities. And you know, now, I mean, it's not that far to the local communities that are in our area, but at that point in time, it was really significant if people came from Summerland or Naramata or OK Falls or Oliver or Kermis and came to the Chautauqua and brought more money into town. And this particular picture, the Dunbar Male Quartet, that was the first picture, and it wasn't as good as that when I first saw it, the way it shows up online. It shows much more murky, but I was absolutely thrilled when in my research, and I found the exact same picture, because for all of these different performers that came to town, they all had really professional packages. They all had a lot of really good advertising information that came with them to town, so that the communities could really promote the people that were going to be participating. And as you can see, and this is in 1921, because now at that point in time, that would have been the third year that Chautauqua had been in Penticton. They were calling it, you know, very successful, that it was growing really rapidly. There was always an awful lot of promotion, and In the article on the right, it does say that in addition to the local community, that they had people from Summerland, Peachland, Oliver, and Karamis coming into town to see the Chautauqua. So that was really a positive thing for the people who had guaranteed the sales. And there were all kinds of really, really interesting little write-ups in the Herald as well. And this particular one started to go the other way because people were concerned about whether or not Chautauqua was going to be worthwhile hanging on. There was always kind of a give and take, and there was an awful lot on the side of the promoters. There was an awful lot of positive advertising, positive articles, and whatnot in the newspaper, but there was also a little bit of doubt on the minds of some other people as to whether or not Chautauqua was actually a good thing for the community. They had different programs, different lineups that came every year, and some years the program would be longer than others. In this particular one, it was only a 4-day festival. But they had people like Ernest Toy, who was a very well-known Australian violinist. They had, amazing entertainers. The names of people who actually went on the Chautauqua circuit are really quite amazing. In the States, Carl Sandburg got his start as far as promoting himself on the Chautauqua tour. It wasn't just people who were looking for a job. There were really, in a lot of cases, people who later became very well-known entertainers and artists who were getting their start promoting themselves. And this little one, I really got a kick out of this one because it says, one of the Chautauqua speakers said the other night that this affair was a pill with a sugar coating. The musicians provided the sugar coating, the lecturers gave the pill. Well, we want more of this medicine every year. The Chautauqua has done us a lot of good. It brought us together from far and near. It entertained us with the best of music. It unfolded to our minds some of the best ideas of modern thought, couched in a way we could understand and appreciate. The Chautauqua is a valuable instrument in the community growth, community uplift, community harmony. So there really were a lot of people who still had those positive thoughts. This particular article in 1927, when you look at the heading, at first I didn't know, I wonder, is this going to be really negative or what it's going to say to it, because it says, large audience hears weird Negro music. So in the article, what it actually says is there's a tone of pathos and sorrow in Negro music that makes it weird. Negro spirituals are the only recognized folklore of America, and the craze for them is growing stronger every year. Jubilee numbers and songs can only be appreciated by those whose imaginations can carry them back to the Southland and see the master with whip in hand driving his slaves, their lack of knowledge, their belief in God, and their constant prayers. Many times there are folks who laugh at the lighter Jubilee numbers, and they can be pardoned because the Negro is a race is emotional, and the modern American Negro is a huge success when he can present these numbers in the old-time emotional way. So even though it was different, it was very different. The people of the community really appreciated the fact that these different things did come to the community, these different opportunities to hear different types of music. And the Deep River Plantation singers and the Jubilee singers were very popular on the circuit. They were one of the most popular acts that they had. And for Canada, one of the people who got started on the Chautauqua circuit was Stephen Leacock. And he would do readings and talks as well. And Penticton had their own Chautauqua girl, and that was Eva Cleland. Eva was born to a family of 5 daughters in Moosomin, Saskatchewan, and all of the girls were very talented musically, and Eva was one of 3 that became teachers. I went through the archives for the Glenbow Museum, and they have almost 400 pictures in their collection of photos that are Nola Ericsson's photographs. And I went through one by one and managed to find this picture, and that's the only picture in the group that is Eva, and it did actually say Eve, it didn't say Eva, but I found it and I was so thrilled. I fired off a copy of it to Mary Lynn and I said, please tell me this is your mom. It's so neat to think that there is actually a picture of her when she was a part of the Chautauqua. And because it's my understanding in the family, they have very few photos, so this one is really kind of a neat rarity. This particular picture of Eva was a studio portrait picture that was taken after she had left the Chautauqua and gone to New York. She went to New York City and she joined the National Music League. What I had gotten through to the Glenbow Museum, there were a couple of letters that were written by Eva when they were putting together information on the Canadian Chautauqua. And in her own words, she had mentioned the fact that she had started with the Chautauqua in 1926, and she had done, a little bit of everything. She did all the bookings. She went through an entire, season of doing all the bookings, handling everything. She had helped to open up Ontario because the Chautauqua headquarters for the Ericssons was actually in Calgary, and then as a part of that, she'd also gone in 1927 with the Ericssons to Chicago, and they would have a major conference where all of the different people who wanted to participate in the circuit had the opportunity to promote themselves as an opportunity to be chosen to go on the circuit. And this was a real learning as well there were about 3 or 4 of the young ladies that worked with the Ericssons who went, and Eva happened to be one of those. And so it was, another bit of education as well. And so in 1929, she actually left the Chautauqua and she went to New York City to join Isabel Scott, another lady who was a Chautauqua superintendent. And they joined the National Music League. And so I had a look because in the 1933 New York City directory, Eva's address was 73 Riverside Drive. So it was just, if you go down 72nd Avenue and just over about half a block, that's where Eva lived. And so it's really kind of neat when you think that this young girl who had grown up in Saskatchewan and then she had, gone around the countryside with the Chautauqua, ended up in New York City. Because if you go down to the end of 72nd Street there, I was trying to place it for my son-in-law, you run right into the Dakota. And so even in those times, the Juilliard was only about 5 blocks away from where she was. So everything was within walking distance. And she was just, a matter of blocks from Central Park as well. And of course that, it's known as the cultural and intellectual hub of New York City. So she was right there where everything was happening. In 1935, she married Hugh Cleland. He had been a member of the local Chautauqua committee, and he had, shown her around a little bit. They had met when she came to Penticton in 1928 with the Chautauqua. And in 1935, after having kept in touch, they got married in Manhattan. And this is a wedding photo that they had taken there. So Eva was always involved in everything. In the letter that she wrote to Sheila Jamison at the Glenbow Museum, she said that she was still busy organizing. She'd never really given it up. And she listed all of the different organizations that she was still involved with, including the Okanagan Symphony, the Okanagan School of the Arts, the Okanagan Art and District Arts Council. In 1960, this was an article in the newspaper because there was a real push on to start the Okanagan Summer School of the Arts. And at that point in time, even provincially, Eva was the person who was the main push behind getting it started. And with the support of the local Board of Trade, which is the equivalent of the Chamber of Commerce, it was officially opened in conjunction with UBC in 1961. And here's another photo because the entire family was involved in all aspects of the artistic community as well as Eva. And this is another picture that was provided. This is actually a Penticton Museum and Archives photo, and it shows Hugh and Eva Cleland as well as Mary Lynn with Leonard Camplin, who was the music director of the Okanagan Symphony in 1964. And this picture, this is the most common picture shown of Eva. And this was the picture that is mainly used because in 1988, she was awarded Canada's most prestigious arts award. And part of that was that, following that was that the city also named the local theater the Cleland Theater. And this is a picture of Eva and Hugh on the steps of their home. And then I just put a couple of other homes because their home is actually on the Heritage Tour. And it was actually built in 1908 as a summer home for Munson, who was with the CPR. And then the Cleland family moved into the home in 1919, and it's still in the family today. There's been a lot of different books, actually, and information that has been written about things. And the Venture book, it's a small little booklet, was written by Jean Weber, and it tells the history of the Okanagan School of the Arts. There's nice pictures in it. There's lots of information about what happened through the years. I was looking at the letter that Eva had written to NOLA, to Sheila Jamison about NOLA Erickson, and researching the Chautauqua. One of the things that she said to her was, "Have you read We Called It Culture by Victoria Case and Robert Case, Doubleday? I found it relevant and pretty reliable." And I had never heard of this before, and actually, so I ordered it. It just came the other day, so I haven't even read it, but I can't wait to see what the difference is, because the one book is written totally from a Canadian perspective, but I think that this particular one is more general and certainly more American. But this is the book that was written by Sheila Jamison, and it is the Chautauqua in Canada, and it's very interesting. It's full of, because it's full of things that we can relate to. It does have a lot of pictures. It has a lot of stories. It names a lot of names of people who were in the Chautauqua, and there's I think there's only one or two mentions actually of Eva in the book, because at the time when the book was being written, she was busy with an awful lot of other things, including her daughter's wedding. And so she did pass on some personal information, but she did not pass on any memorabilia for the book. Although she did mention in her letter the names of a number of people that she was still in contact with. And prior to hearing about this, she and some of her friends were actually talking about the fact that they should put together some kind of, they were thinking of a booklet talking about the Chautauqua, because she really felt that Chautauqua was a very, very important part of the art scene in Canada and should be recognized as such. In fact, when she had gone to Ottawa, Ottawa or Toronto for a meeting with somebody on the Canadian arts level. The fellow was commenting on the fact that he felt that real culture in Canada started with the Canadian ballet. And according to Eva, she challenged him on it because she felt the Chautauqua was the beginning of culture in Canada. And this particular poem, The Chautauqua Girl, this is actually on the front leaf of the book. And it was actually first found in the Pentagon Herald in 1921. And this is actually the first 5 paragraphs of an article in a section called Odds and Ends, and it was as an argument that was pro-Chautauqua, and it was signed Uncle Fred. So I don't know if Uncle Fred was a local person who was always in the newspaper, or if he actually had a column, but it's really quite a cute little poem that he had, the way that he has written it. As I was going through and researching Chautauqua, I found there's a lot of Chautauqua trivia, little known things, like the fact that Thomas Edison's his second wife was the daughter of Lewis Miller, who was one of the founders of Chautauqua. And in 1969, Elvis Presley actually starred as a circuit Chautauqua manager named Walter Hale in The Trouble with Girls. And U.S. President Woodrow Wilson described Chautauqua during World War I as an integral part of the national defense. And the CBC actually produced a movie in 1984 entitled Chautauqua Girl. It was set in Alberta around 1921, and the movie was about a woman who finds a job as an agent for a troupe of traveling Chautauqua performers, and it was made more difficult because it was tough financial hard times then. Other trivia that happened to come along as I was looking things up is the fact that for over 30 years in southern Alberta, they have continued to have Chautauquas. And when Chautauqua first came into Canada, of course, because it was headquartered in Calgary, Alberta was one of the first areas that really got involved in Chautauqua. And so they've got, in the southern Alberta, there's what they call the Mormon Trail. I haven't found out why the Mormon Trail, but that particular circuit continues to have Chautauquas every single year. And different areas, the Muskoka area of Ontario has always maintained a Chautauqua as a part of their tradition. And for Canada 150, there were an awful lot of areas throughout Canada that put on Chautauquas, so that it was really recognized this year as an important part of the fabric of the last 150 years of Canada. And in Edmonton this year, they put on a large Chautauqua. Fernie in the Kootenays was one of the first areas that got a Chautauqua in the early days. And in 2015, they put on a Chautauqua, and then again this year, they put on a Chautauqua for Canada 150. The St. Joseph's School in Kelowna did a Chautauqua this year for Canada 150. And when I was talking to Jean, she said that actually several years ago that Holy Cross had put on a Chautauqua. So, it is out there, and it's amazing how many people are still aware of it and really wanting to promote it. And this is just a little something that I found, kind of one of those little incidents that means nothing, but it's just interesting as all get out. So that these are the logos for Grimsby, Chautauqua in Ontario. The Chautauqua Institute in the middle, that's in New York State, and that's the original one. The bottom one is the Chautauqua Center in Colorado, and actually it has been going ever since its inception as well. So then when we have a look at the Shatford Center, Okanagan School of the Arts, which is, so closely associated its beginnings with the School of Arts with Eva, This is the original logo that was used when the Okanagan School of the Arts took over stewardship of the Shatford Center. So, I mean, it's just one of those quirky little things that it was just like, wow. And this is just, you know, a list of all of the different organizations that Eva impacted. And, you know, as you look through the list, and, you know, the Penticton District Arts Council, the Okanagan Mainline Regional Arts Council, Okanagan Symphony, Okanagan Summer School of the Arts, Glengarry Figure Skating Club, the Community Concert Society, the Okanagan Image, and that was a traveling show that, you know, kind of based on the idea of a Chautauqua that actually traveled around the province. And that was in 1976. The Penticton Arts Development Fund, the Penticton Junior Strings and Adult Strings, Penticton Music School, Penticton and District Foundation. There's so many different things that were impacted by this one lady, but not without the help of her family. The Cleland family as a group were very involved in everything that happened on the local art scene in Penticton. And actually, Mary Lynn, when we were talking about this in February, when I was kind of doing some of my first investigating and whatnot, she said that Eva and Hugh's community involvement reached beyond the arts, and none of these things couldn't have happened without all the people that contributed their time, their expertise, and their belief in our community. Ready, willing, and able volunteers are the ones responsible. And that was what Mary Lynn had said, but in anything that you read about Eva Cleland, that is something that Eva Cleland would have said. The Okanagan School of the Arts is a non-profit organization that now has stewardship of the Shatford Center. And we're always looking for volunteers, supporters. You can sign up for emails. There's a newsletter that comes out so that you always know what's happening over there. There's lots and lots of activities. One of the things that the Okanagan Historical Society is helping with over there is that we have a program called Creative for Life. And its tagline is, for those who weren't born yesterday. And so part of that we're actually hosting is historical talks that happen on the last Thursday of every month at 10 o'clock. But we encourage everyone to come, because what we really want to start and have with this Creative for Life program that we have is an interactive presentation, so that people can come and they can present their stories and share their history. They can share their photos. But everyone who's there is welcome to jump in and tell your story, or, you know, clarify points that are put out there, because when you're dealing with oral history, there's an awful lot of things that can have different points of view depending on who you talk to. Thank you.